We can laugh about it now, but it was not funny at the time.
You're the golden red tide, got the strength to carry on. Won't go, my child, won't go.
Hello, beautiful soul family. Britt Cannon here, host of the Walk On podcast, the podcast where I try to demystify spirituality, personal growth and healing, and whatever else I feel like talking about. This week's episode is called The Victim Complex. Dun, dun, dun. And it's about how, interpersonally in relationships, in family dynamics, and then also systemically on, a societal level, it's usually the people, just fixing my microphone, it's usually, the victim complex is a term thrown around to silence actual victims of abuse and empower perpetrators of abuse. So usually it's something, as with a lot of things, projected from abusers onto their victims to disempower and silence the victims. And how usually the person with the actual victim complex, as in believes themselves to be a victim but isn't actually one, are the perpetrators of abuse, of violence, of oppression. And I just see this happen a lot in news and pop culture current events. I'll get into some specifics, although I am honestly a little afraid because stans are dangerous. Idol worship of celebrities is really a problem. And I'm always a little afraid to bring up specifics in these videos because I don't want to get death threats sent to me. Although I guess that is part of being seen. So threaten away, I suppose. Because I'm going to get into it. Before we begin, I just want to remind you to give this video a like. Tell me your experience with this in the comments, if this is relatable to you, if you know what I'm talking about, if this content helps you at all. Because that's sort of my point in putting this out there, is when it's been done to me, when I've been accused of having a victim complex just for speaking my truth, just for sharing my experiences, it really kind of clouds my clarity. And it's hard to see what is true. It's hard to own my feelings. You know, when you've been gaslit your whole life, you are very on Bambi legs about it at first. You're very timid, you're very unsure. And so I just want to be a voice in the mess telling you what happened to you is valid, your feelings on it are valid. It's always okay to speak your truth. If someone can't handle your truth, it's none of your fucking business. You can share your truth in love and compassion. But if you are just owning your pain, you are brave, you are powerful, you are amazing, and I'm rooting for you. So that's the point of this video. If that resonates with you and you want to tell me about your story so that other people can see it and maybe we can build a little community here, please go ahead and do that. Subscribe to the channel if you'd like to see more of this content. And lastly, but not leastly, if you want to listen to the full hour-long episode of this, that's audio only, the link is in the description box below, as is a link to my website where you can check out blogs, merch, my poetry book, my music, and lots of other things, including nude photos of moi. So we are multifaceted sluts in this household. So the victim complex. So my own experience with this is vast and far-ranging because I have a little bit of a predisposition towards liking or being attracted to at let's call it what it is, narcissistic individuals. I grew up with narcissistic adults in various forms. You know, sometimes just being having addiction issues can make someone behave selfishly in a way that looks like narcissism. I experienced that. I experienced malignant narcissism. I experienced what I would suggest is bordering on sociopathy and just a very lack a very strong and present lack of empathy going on in my childhood home. And I was constantly sort of gaslit. The dysfunction was really minimized. But at the same time, while no one would actually productively deal with the issues at hand, everyone would talk shit about everyone else. Everyone had like a really strong case of the main character syndrome. And this resulted in like everyone feeling like the victim and being totally unable to see how they are causing harm in other people's lives, like how they're harming each other. Combine that with a total lack of like forthright communication, and it's just a mess, right? Everyone's talking shit about everyone else. Everyone's turning everyone else against everyone else. There's jealousy. There's pettiness. There's like hardcore gossip. And really, when you're when you're like a sensitive person, when you have a lot of empathy, when you can see all the sides of everyone's struggles and pain, and when you're not the kind of person that can just like take that and be like, okay, I'm gonna fight too. I'm joining the fight too. Like I'm developing a thick skin. I've been told my whole life, like, you're too sensitive, you're too soft, you're too tenderhearted. And it's true. You know, I was to be in that family. That's why I ended up being the one that walked away, the cycle breaker, because it hurt me too much. I internalized every bit of suffering. I really struggled with it, and I had to break away in order to heal. And so that's just like where my experience with it began. And then throughout my life, I've encountered close friendships and romantic relationships again and again where the person I'm dealing with cannot see how they're hurting me because they can only see their own pain. And I think everyone does this a little bit. Like, I think that's part of the, like, a very good reason to orient yourself in the direction of healing, to see the error of your ways, and to always be stepping in the direction of love. Like, I think that's why it's so important, because if you continue being this way, you're just going to get worse and worse. Whereas if you see that you're causing harm and you can learn how to take accountability without feeling shame, you can stop doing harm. And that's why social justice, I think, is so entwined with spirituality to me, and how a white spiritual practitioner who doesn't speak on social justice issues is probably not someone to be trusted, because they're not fully unpacking their ego. You know, they're in a victim complex too, in the sense that if you ask them a question about oppression, they'll tell you, don't worry about it, you're being negative or whatever. And that's hurtful, that's harmful. Erasing very real struggle, erasing the truth of the material, and really silencing someone else's truth is a huge red flag for me. So I think that spirituality and social justice are very entwined, because how can you heal truly if you're not addressing the systemic? All issues are systemic. If you trace every familial interpersonal issue all the way back to the root, you get to a systemic cause, whether it's poverty, whether it's slavery, whether it's genocide, whether it's whatever. The world and humanity in the world has been through and perpetrated a lot of violence and suffering. And that's why it's important to address it, because you can't get all the facets of the wound if you're not addressing that part. Tiny diatribe. So, when I've been, people pleaser to the extreme, couldn't say no to nobody, just bent over backwards, just really self-harmed by way of overgiving to people who weren't interested in reciprocating. And so, or weren't that interested, would every once in a while, but it was basically breadcrumbing. You know what I mean? I was I can see you're about to get pissed, so here's a little crumb. And I'd be oh, thank you so much. Oh, I'm so full. And we can laugh about it now, but it was not funny at the time. So eventually I would come to a place where I would be I have to say something. I'm being really hurt. I don't think this person is understanding where I'm coming from. And so I gotta muster up the energy to talk to them about it. And whereas like I used to be like, oh, we never fight, we never have any conflicts, like it's so smooth sailing. The one and only very first time, this is with my family, with romantic partners, with friendships, with bosses, the very first time I'm like, hey, I have a little issue I'd like to talk about. Boom. Shit hits the fan. It's over. It's the worst thing I've ever done. I'm perpetuating like my own victimhood, and like I can't believe you would say that I'm a bad person, or like I can't believe you would accuse me of being ableist as a person who's being ableist, or whatever. You know, like the whole thing falls apart because I dared speak up one little time. And I think that this is it. That is the perfect example of when someone is like owning their experience and speaking their truth, and we all have our own individual truths, and the only way we get to the bottom of like the truth of life is by sharing our truths with one another. But if somebody's ego is so fucking thick that they can't handle your truth because it triggers them, because they've never shared their truth, and they're like, oh, the audacity on you to like own what's happened to you, how dare you, I've never been able to do that, or whatever. Like, you know, when we get into like cases of the oppression Olympics, when like a white woman is like, you think you're oppressed, I'm oppressed. Meanwhile, it's like someone rich, they live in a McMansion, you know, they just like didn't have the right coupon at Kohl's or whatever, and like it's the end of the world. Whatever. I got a bone to pick with my fellow white woman today, I guess. So when someone stands up bravely in their vulnerability, in their power, in their truth, and makes the courageous statement of like, this is the way that I have been harmed, this is my experience, this is what I've been through, and then people are like, blech, I don't want to see that, I don't want to hear it, I don't want to acknowledge it, I don't want to look at it. You know, if I start looking at this, the whole thing's going to come down and I don't want to clean up the mess. You know, it's just like you're an inconvenience to them. You're like annoying to them. Like, how dare you ruin my good time, me living in my blissful ignorance. Don't come to me with this shit. And this is true, again, in families and then also systemically. A great example of this is the whole Dave Chappelle thing. You know, like, why are you going on these rants against trans people right now? Because people called you out for going on these rants against trans people, and now you're the victim. Like, you're standing on a stage in a position of power with a microphone yelling harmful things that literally leads to physical violence and even murder of trans people. So like, you're being irresponsible. You're wielding your power as a weapon. And as someone marginalized, you should know better. As someone who's been through the backlash at being a visible, marginalized person who accumulates some sort of like power and prestige in the world, you should know better. You should understand what that pain feels like, and you should not perpetuate it onto someone else. But then to be like, I'm the victim here because these people are canceling me. Meanwhile, you haven't stopped working. Like, you were more canceled in the early 2000s. Now you have a complex about it, and you're like, I'm canceled, even though, like, bitch, where? And you're the victim. And, like, the people you're hurting don't matter. They don't count. They're not people to you. You are not connecting with, like, the humanity in the marginalized group that you're further contributing to the marginalization of. Another great example of this is, like, oops, scary time, the Johnny Depp Amber Heard trial that's going on. Now, if you don't agree with me, like, whatever, but I am like well versed in the study of trauma. I have been traumatized myself, and I think that people's willingness, this reminds me of this quote by Lena Dunham. My camera's about to run out of room, so hold on just a second. So it reminds me of this quote by Lena Dunham where she says that she can tell like where someone is on their healing journey, depending on when they watch Girls, if they think that Hannah and Adam belong together or not. And I think that's like, I can tell where someone is on their healing journey, whether they believe Amber or not. If you are like falling for the superficial glib charm of Johnny Depp, if you think that he's the victim, if you think that people can be mutually abusive, if you like buy the rhetoric, if you've like bought into the smear campaign, then like you have some stuff to unpack. Maybe you're a victim and you can't like feel the fact that you've been victimized. Maybe you are doing what I'm talking about, where you're like siding with an abuser because that feels good to you, to some wounded part in you, where you don't believe yourself. You know what I mean? And I think that's part of what the problem is, because a lot of people who have that victim complex, this is like Johnny Depp, you know, like he's perpetuated this harm. He's been a problem for a long time. He clearly struggles with some kind of deep wounding where he needs to be obliterated all the time. Like he has severe substance use issues. I have so much empathy for anyone who struggles with substances, because it means you're trying to numb. It means you have a well of pain so deep that you're trying to like check out of it any way you can. And that's like a really sad way to live life, as someone who struggled with it myself. Like it's after the fog of the inebriation lifts, your problems are still there, and they're usually worse than the night before where you left them. And it's just a struggle, and I feel for that struggle. Like I said, my whole family has dealt with it and struggled with it, and I love them so much, even though I'm not in contact with them. And I really pray for their healing, because I know that they're stuck, and I know that he's stuck. He has every like telltale sign of someone who's like deep in their addiction and who may not ever get out of it. Like he's a lost soul. But that being said, when you're inebriated, when you live life in that state, when you've been doing it for so many years, when you have so much power, when you are so beloved by fans, you know, when you're in this unique position that he's in, and you do have the charm, and you do have the like the notoriety, like it can become a weapon, similar to Dave Chappelle. Like you have the platform, but you're not being responsible with it. Instead, you're surrounding yourself with enablers and yes men who don't call you out on your bullshit. And when someone does, when someone like really loved you and wanted to help you in a codependent way, for sure, and you just like trash them and tear them down and want to like bankrupt them and like smear them on a public scale and have people sending death threats while you're like slapping hands outside the courthouse, it's like not okay. And anyone who has really truly loved someone and like bent over backwards for them and fought for them and stood up for them and like sacrificed themselves for the betterment of that person or to enable that person, and then they do the betrayal, the heart-wrenching betrayal of running a smear campaign on you, it is like devastating. We're talking years of therapy here, so spare me, you know, the siding with him. It's just like not fucking cool. And it really is a red flag for me for people who have not done their healing work and who haven't really come to understand power dynamics, abuse dynamics, what they look like, what a victim looks like, and probably because a victim lives within them that they're not ready to embrace. And also, let's talk about the backlash to Me Too and the backlash to the queer liberation movement, the backlash to on a, you know, in a different conversation as far as like these white supremacists out here and the Republican Party just like slowly stripping people of their rights. Like this is because there was a reckoning, there was a movement of oppressed people telling their stories, owning their truths, speaking out, standing up for themselves, standing up for justice. There was a sharing of experience going on, and then there was an empowerment and like a solidarity blooming that the victims, the people with the victim complex, which like who has a bigger victim complex than a Republican? I remember growing up with like Republican family members being like, affirmative action is racist against white people, and like I haven't been promoted because of affirmative action, when it's like, are you serious? It's like when I had a partner once who argued with me that he was in the minority at his job because he was one of the few men. Mind you, he's hired with like no experience, barely any education, like, and immediately just boop, 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 climbs up the ranks. And it's like, that is not how that works, my friend. But that's the victim complex. That's someone playing the victim. That's someone not being able to understand and hold space for the suffering of others. They can only see their perspective. They can only see where they're coming from. They can only see their pain. But also there's like a distance from their own pain, a dissociation from the root of what they're getting at, because this is what you hear from like libertarians, you know, where they're like, I understand the government hurts me, like I understand that these policies are like damaging, I understand the ways that I'm struggling, but like I'm still racist, you know. It's like you're not getting the full picture because you can't see past your own experience, and you think that you are like the victim, like you think that you are the main character of this world and everybody else is just living in it, and we either exist to like be a friend to you and be on your side, or we're your enemy, even though the real enemy are the people with power who are oppressing us and like exploiting us. You can't put the blame where it is. This is like, you know, the guy that like lashes out at his boss, but really what he's saying is like, I hate you, Dad, you know. And we've all been there, you know, we have all been there. But I think like it's upsetting to see it happen on like a world news scale, because it's triggering, and like it's so tough to see people jump on the bandwagon of people with a victim complex and then turn around and gaslight the people who are actually being victimized and further abuse them and further try to silence them and oppress them, when it takes so much strength to tell your story. It takes so much strength to own your struggles and to like try to heal and to feel your feelings and to like go back through your life and recontextualize it in a way that's compassionate to yourself. Like the world so badly, when I mean the world, I mean society, so badly wants to beat you down, wants to crush you into a numb, docile little worker drone, and to be breaking out of that, to break those cycles of generational trauma, to speak truth to violence, to abuse, to oppression is heroic. It's nothing short of heroic. And it should be treated as such, and it shouldn't be taken away or set back, like a whole movement or multiple movements set back because some little piss babies can't handle or hold space for someone else's truth and someone else's experience. And this is like, think about critical race theory, like just teaching about the actual historical events is enough to like make the whole Republican Party like shit their pants. And it's like, why? Like, it's nothing against you. Like, unless you're a Nazi, you know, if you say you can't teach that Nazis were the bad guys in the Holocaust, it's like, why not? You can't teach that slavers were like bad people who did bad things and committed horrific acts of violence. It's like, why not? I mean, it tells you everything you need to know right there. And so I just want to leave you with a little bit of reassurance and a little bit of encouragement. Like, I hope this made sense. Basically, it's very clear. It becomes very clear, like, who is actually victimized in a situation and who has a victim complex. Like, if you take a bird's eye view and you see who is actually causing harm and who is just speaking about their experience, that tells you everything you need to know. If you find yourself in a position where when you try to speak your truth, someone comes back being like, how could you do this to me? How could you make me suffer in this way? How could you hurt me so bad? You know you're working with someone who's very much in a victim mentality. It's empowerment to tell your story. It's empowerment to speak your truth. And that is the opposite of a victim complex. Naming the fact that you were victimized, there's nothing wrong with that. It's like the bravest thing in the world. So congratulations to you for speaking your truth, for owning your experience. Please don't stop. Ever, ever, ever. I love you so much. Thank you for being here. Thank you for doing the work. Happy healing. Bye.